Welcome to listening to Paint Dry with Mike and Dan, a podcast about the art and hobby of miniature painting. I'm Mike. Thank you so much for joining us on our continued quest to become better, braver, happier painters. Now, I bet you're wondering, you're like, where the holy heck have these guys been? They promised us a flood of content. The best answer I have is just that life kind of ran over after I got back from Reapercon. I do have a bunch of interviews that we're going to start pushing out, and I need to apologize to our guests and to our listeners for not getting them out sooner. When I got back from work, it was just kind of crazy. Lots of stuff going on, and then a bunch of family stuff going on. So it just, all of a sudden, it was a month later and away from Reapercon. And we've even conducted a couple of interviews since we've been back. But, you know, my apologies. I'm not going to keep you long. I had a fantastic time at Reapercon. Dan and I are going to get together here soon and post an episode about a kind of a debrief on what's been going on, end of summer type review. So that'll be a lot of fun to kind of hash out with him. And so, but I will tell you this, is that today we have an interview with Raggy Paints, or Dev Sodagar from CK Studios. Awesome interview, great guy, really someone in a very short period of time I can definitely say has already become a friend, and who, you know, he provided some awesome feedback to me on a couple of my pieces for Reapercon, and I learned a ton from him in just the little bit of time that I got to spend with him. So that interview was today. That'll be coming out today, and you'll hear it in a few minutes. Also, we have interviews with Pirate Monkey, Anthony Rodriguez, Stephen Garcia, and of course the amazing Lila Mev. We have an episode with her. Then we also have an interview coming out with Bryce Kokanor, who is a fantastic artist. And actually it was unique because Bryce was one of the judges for one of the pieces I had in Reapercon. So it was interesting to hear what he had to say about how judges approach their work, etc. But today we get a fantastic conversation with Dev, and I hope you enjoy. More content will be coming out quicker than in the past, and at some point when all that stuff is out, we'll be back to our regular production cycle of every 2 weeks. So without further ado, Dev Sodagar of CK Studios. Dev, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
I am super happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, I know we were trying to get an interview a while ago, and things, you know, kind of all went to hell time-wise, but I'm glad that you weren't like, oh, I hate these guys. They're jerking me around.
You know what? I love having something hobby-related to listen to whilst I'm painting, so
That's awesome.
You know, this hits that spot, and you get some great insights from artists, and you're right there, so you can just sketch out an idea if it takes your fancy. It's perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. And you know what? Now you're on the spot to give somebody else that type of inspiration.
Ruh-roh.
Yeah, that's okay. So just a little bit of background for our listeners. How did you get into the hobby?
So when I was a small kid, like 5 or 6, I was super into army, like military stuff. Mm-hmm. And in the UK, it's all about Humboldt paints and airfix kits. And I was super into it with a couple of my friends, and then one of them introduced me to Warhammer, and I was all of like 7 or 8 at the time, and I fell for it hard, and we painted the worst models ever. My favorite memory of this time is deciding that bolt gun metal was a good proxy for hair stubble. I still have that figure somewhere.
Actually, you know what though, I will give you this, it kind of does make sense, because stubble does kind of have a little gleam to it sometimes in the light, you know. So
I think you're giving me more credit than I deserve, but I'll take it.
At the end of this, I'm going to show you one of my first miniatures, and it could have used some bolt gun metal stubble.
Yeah, I mean, so from there, I kind of, you know, was mostly in, occasionally out of the hobby, but really not improving on the painting because I honestly didn't put the time or effort I needed to into it. And then I moved to California from the UK and wanted just something that I could do as a pastime, de-stress, and started painting again. Not long after that, I met Kat and Caleb, and I suddenly started getting very serious about painting, and that was 5-6 years ago now.
Oh, wow.
And at that point, I actually started to really improve. I very much had the mentality of, I paint for at least an hour a day, almost every day. And you know, that's not a lot of time out of your day, really. Getting up an hour earlier is not as much of a hardship as you might think. and the gains you get are incredible.
Well, now, does this count for you too? Like, are there days where you don't paint and just work on, like, clean mold lines or something like that?
Yeah, so when I say paint, I mean, assembly or model cleaning or something like that. Something hobby-related that is not cleaning your desk. Watching YouTube videos are great. They do not count as progressing in your hobby. I don't care how good the artist you're watching is. It doesn't count unless you're practicing that as you're watching it. But yeah, no, anything specifically about getting the model from sprue to table.
Nice. And so what I'm hearing from you is active, not passive painting. Right?
That is the perfect way of phrasing it.
Okay, awesome. So it sounds to me also like Kat and Caleb have to take a lot of blame lately, because actually Dan and I met in the Kat and Caleb class.
That's right.
Then that's how we became friends and then started the podcast. So
yeah, I was re-listening to that episode just the other day, actually.
Were you?
Kat
Okay.
and Caleb, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it honestly, I mean, I know Kat is very, very on point about this. They really are focused on building the community and improving the community and helping people be better painters. And, that's what really drew me to them, right? Like, there are a lot of artists out there with a lot of talent that are very keen on showing how much talent they have. And I appreciate that, especially when they come from a traditional arts background, which I don't have. I really get value out of that. But the way that Kat and Caleb go about it, it is accessible and valuable for everybody. And that's really what I love and why I love those two.
Right, and I want to tell our listeners to keep posted, because I know that they're starting to do classes again. And I believe you're going to start doing, besides just teaching at cons, you're going to start teaching classes too.
I hope so, yeah.
That's awesome. And we'll let everybody know. We'll post, we'll advertise that you guys are doing the shows and the classes, because they are valuable. And they learn so much from the CK class style, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'd say about it is con classes are great, right? But there's only so much you can teach in an hour and a half. And there are only some subjects you can really approach in that time frame. A day-long class is a million times better and gives you way more breadth of subject. And a 2-day class like, the CK Studios airbrushing classes or, a lot of the other weekend classes that folks have started doing, it doesn't, any artist, you're going to get so much more out of that than you ever could taking a bunch of, individual classes at a con.
And like a con class is kind of like Cliff Notes, whereas the 2-day workshops are kind of like immersive learning.
Exactly. Exactly. With an artist that's going to go around and going to give you individual direct feedback, which even, video tutorials and instructions can't manage in the same way.
Right. Absolutely. Amen to that. Learning in person is amazing. So when you started and you decided to make the decision to up your painting skills, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Oh man, so many. I think for me personally, one of the ones that doesn't get talked about enough is quantity of paint in the brush, and consistency of the paint to an extent. But those are things, and these are again are super tactile things that you get much better handle on in class. But I used to slop on paint thick because I am the laziest painter in the world, right? To the extent that I was teaching a class earlier today, and instead of putting the wash on my palette and applying it to the model, I just applied the wash from the dropper bottle on the model directly.
Nice.
I am super lazy.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there, because that is my school of thought of that's fun.
Yeah.
Like that is it is a lot more fun to just pour wash on than. Sorry, I'm going to sign up for your newsletter now, because that's my style right there.
Absolutely, and if you want somebody who's actually good and of that style, Roman Lapat. The man, he will paint with his fingers. It's incredible.
Yeah. That's where the first time I saw it was in one of Roman's classes, and I went, excuse me, sir, where's your newsletter? And then he was moving around with his hands, and he looked up, he goes, if I could do this with my nose, I would. I might. And then
he's incredible. I am absolutely in awe of Roman. Can't remember where I was going with this.
Originally, we were talking about some of the challenges you faced, and amount of paint on the brush was.
So super lazy. I want one thick coat. I really do. I may have fallen hard for contrast. largely on the back of that. Moving from one thick coat to actually thinner coats, and then moving from that, the really hard step for me was knowing what an overloaded brush looks like, what an underloaded brush looks like, what the right load on a brush looks like. Though that is something that is a personal journey of like tactile experience, painting a lot on your hand. Once you've got that, that's going to help you a huge amount. And it took me a while, and I'm getting better, and it really does make a difference.
It's a struggle because you're not like, it's not even just talking about how much to put on your brush if you're going to use a wash or a recess wash or edge highlighting or glazing. Like there's so many different tiers of that. So I totally get why that's a struggle. I struggle with it every day I paint. It's like, wow, you know, and then you're like, crap, you got the glob of paint, or then you're like, oh man, too much paint on the edge highlight. Now I've got a little dip on the model. And,
yeah.
you know, like,
and you know, it's a different paint line. It's a different paint within a same line. It's a different age of bottle. All of these things change the starting consistency of the paint, and it's an endless learning experience.
That's all right. Let's all just quit painting. It's too hard. It's too damn hard.
It's a challenge. Enjoy it. Have fun.
Okay, so now you're taking that next step, right? And so Caleb and Kat approach you about teaching classes.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what made you decide to do those classes, and how has that impacted your painting?
Yeah. So I actually started helping out with the social media community side for them. Shortly after, I first met them at Gen Con a few years ago, but they did a weekend class, which is the famous independent characters airbrushing class that they all talked about, was the class I happened to be in. Totally, I wasn't even a listener of the podcast at the time. Shh, don't tell Justin.
Wait, there's other podcasts out there? What are you talking about, man?
Well, not anymore. It's gone, right?
Oh, is it gone? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No. Actually, I've only vaguely heard of independent. I listen to horror podcasts. No offense to any community podcasts out there, but it's kind of like when writers don't read their own genre because they don't want to. I like scary stories, so that's where I
Strabblecast and things like that.
The Pseudopod, I don't know if you've heard of them.
Yeah.
Alistair was on the show.
Wicked.
The host, he was awesome.
Yeah. I was originally an Escape Pod listener way back.
Yes, yeah.
I never quite got into the horror myself, but Escape Pod and Podcastle for years were my jam, and eventually I realized there were fewer stories that interested me, and I drifted away. But I listened to that all through college and well into like my professional career.
And it's funny talking to Alistair, is British as well. Yeah. He knew what Warhammer was. He knew the whole D&D miniature painting world and all that stuff. So it's interesting how small it is. And then, have you heard of the Magnus Archives?
I've heard of them. I've never really listened, but yeah.
They have a whole Rusty Quill line of shows that's all about Dungeons and Dragons and painting. They don't really do a lot about painting and stuff, but yeah, the nerddom crosses a lot of boundaries these days.
Absolutely. But yeah, Kat and Caleb, I loved what they were doing. I wanted to, help them succeed, help them grow. So I, got involved, and I moved back to the UK shortly after that class. So I kind of, had the opportunity to kind of reach out to stores in the UK, give them a place to stay when they came over, those kinds of things, and that's how I really, got to know them and got to be a part of CK.
Well, that's awesome. Now, how is now teaching classes? What has that done for your painting?
Yeah, so, man, teaching classes for me is an opportunity to see things through the eyes of my students and remember the challenges that I faced and see the challenges I didn't face, because sometimes you will find something a lot easier than somebody else, and changing your perspective on what a process is. And Kat and Caleb are incredible about this, and rehearsing ahead of time and really getting their style together. But for me, it gives me, I may be the instructor in a class, but I will have students ask questions that will suddenly give me an entirely different perspective on whatever it is that we're covering, or an idea for something completely unrelated. And you cannot overstate the value of that, just for fresh perspectives, right? It's just a different take on, coming to a convention, sitting with all of the artists, chatting about what you've been doing, and talking techniques, and suddenly getting an inspiration. It's all the same thing. You're building a community, you're building people that you know, and seeing their ideas and perspectives, and it all helps.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's amazing to me to hear all these teachers talk about how much they get from their students, and how it retrain their mind on how to think about how painting and stuff like that. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So is this your first Reapercon?
It is, yeah.
Yes.
I am a con goer, but it's a relatively new thing for me, and over the last few years, Nova has made it very difficult for me to say no to going to Nova.
Right.
And all of my friends go to Nova, and there's a great community there. But unfortunately, it's exactly the same weekend as Reapercon, and it makes it tough. And mercifully, in some ways, this year Nova didn't happen, and Reapercon did, so I didn't have to make a choice, Sophie's choice. It's actually been fantastic. It is a very, very different style of convention. I'm not a tournament player. I'm a kind of casual gamer and enthusiastic painter. And I think Reapercon really hits those buttons, Nova is incredible for the efforts it goes to with charity and the tournaments that it runs, because it's really nailed, running tournaments. And I have so many great friends there and great experiences. But this is a different pace, and I've also loved it, yeah.
And it's different to look out, and one thing you don't get at the Nova is you look out into the main ballroom, everybody's set up painting.
I know.
It's crazy.
I was looking out there. I was walking earlier today, and I was just looking across the hall there, and I'm like, you came from wherever in the country it is that you came from with this much gear and full-on light arcs and paint stands with all of your paints. I'm like, I really hope you drove, because there's no way you could fly with that much stuff.
Well, we had to move the interview because the guy who was sitting at the table with us decided he was going to airbrush. So I'm like, oh my god.
With a full-on airbrushing booth. This isn't just cracking out the airbrush gun. Airbrush booth, compressor, airbrush, the whole 9 yards. Yeah, no, incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you done any of the hobby hijinks or anything? Have you had a chance?
No, I love speed painting. I am, as well as being a lazy painter, I want to bang stuff out, right? Mm-hmm. The highlight of my painting career is managing 770 models last year.
Oh, Jesus.
And I love speed paints. I love trying to crank something out in 30 minutes or an hour. Mm. It is something I've done videos on. I tried to do a Necron 2,000 point army in a day. Did not go well. There was a lot of sleep deprivation and a very, very grumpy dev for several days after that. It's more of a challenge than you'd think, but I really do want to go and do some of the hobby hijink stuff, but I was fortunate enough to get a bunch of classes in. I also was prepping some stuff for the classes that I'm doing today. So it's not happened yet, but I really want to, and if I can get in on Sophie Says After Dark.
I think I'm going to try to do that tonight after the awards ceremony.
All right, we're going to have to do it together. We'll get a seat, yeah.
That'll be awesome. Yeah. Tell me, what classes are you teaching here?
So I'm teaching one class twice. Okay. I didn't want to go too heavy in on my first con and miss out on the con experience itself. Right. But the class I'm teaching is ethnic skin tones, which is something that's super important to me. I'm mixed race, as the name kind of may give away. As a kid growing up, you see flesh on a bottle, it means Caucasian flesh. And I got over it, and I worked with it, and I figured out alternative solutions, and paints companies have come a long, long way, and have a lot further to go, I think. Mm-hmm. But it's still a hurdle for people, because if you watch 90% of painting tutorials online, they're great, and they teach you how to paint Caucasian flesh, and that's fine. But I want to help people think about their paint choices in a way that's going to encourage them to to branch out from that and actually get some diversity on the table.
That's awesome, yeah. And I think that also we get so funneled into the Space Marine, what the kind of, the white characters. And there were so many amazing models. Like I know the one that I actually printed out from one of the artists who had Mark Masklins as a bust of a black woman. That I'm like, this looks like she's going to start talking. I've never seen skin tones painted that way, and it's a challenge to kind of think outside of that standard box. So I'm impressed. I'm gonna have to. I was trying to get your class, but the Reapercon classes sold out so fast.
They really did. I was very glad that I managed to get a few, but yeah, I actually originally I was only doing the one class, and by the time I'd logged on to check to get my own tickets, my class had sold out. And I'm not a particularly well-known artist, and I guess the subject captured the imagination. So I reached out to Ron and said, "Listen, if you want, I'm happy to do
well, it's an insane timely class, because even if you look at the new Stormcast Models Games Workshop release, they have different skin tones in them too, and they don't really have the paint range, I think, to paint them per se. But
it started, I mean, Cadian Flesh came out a couple years ago, but I mean, my go-to for GW paints for darker skin tones is still Rhinox Hide, and I'm not going to lie, that name is not a good look for doing darker skin tones. It's like, you could have named that better.
Absolutely, and it's amazing to me too that when you look at you can add the greens and the blues around the eyes and stuff in Caucasian flesh, but darker skinned flesh is so much more. There's so many more colors in play. I mean, I know. I never even would. One of the first classes I took on ethnic skin tone was they base coated the model purple.
Yep, I still do that.
You still do that?
Yep.
Okay.
In fact, it won't even be the base coat; the highlights as well often.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I mean, muted purples are darker skin tones to a large effect, and you control it with introductions of some warmer red tones. But yeah, that's part of how those darker skin tones read is more purple.
Right, and you also can almost get to. Sometimes it almost has like kind of a non-metallic metal kind of feel to it because the highlight is so stark and bright because just the way light reflects and such.
It is incredible. Like, some of the particularly like East African tribal tones, they're so dark. It was once described to me by a friend as the skin is so dark it looks blue. It looks like a midnight blue, and it's just. When you can capture that on a model, it's just the best feeling because you're breaking everything that you'd previously learned about painting flesh, and it's just like, okay, now I'm suddenly starting to not just learn to paint a diverse range of figures, but really look at the colors in your reference photos and translate them without being limited by the name on the paint pot, which is so important.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the name of the paint is always misleading, But I always reminded of I believe it was the Chris Rock joke about him having a friend that was so black that he would leave a handprint on charcoal. And you're absolutely right. That has kind of like, if you look at that skin tone, it does have a kind of a blue to it, which is, I think now as a painter, I look at things so differently than I did before. Like it's almost like kind of a veil has been lifted.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
And so you look at the way colors interplay. Yeah. And my wife and I battle all the time. That's blue. I'm like, that is not blue. That is, and we fight over what the colors are and stuff, And then she tells me whatever I painted was too dark and she doesn't like it. And then I go cry in the corner. Typical relationship type
absolutely,
stuff.
Yeah.
So now that you've had your first Reapercon, what's kind of next in the schedule for Dev? What are you up to after this?
Right after this, I am racing back. I owe Nova Open some Stormcast Eternal. Definitely didn't call them the other name. They're not Sigmarines. They are Stormcast Eternal. I owe them some for their Fallout charity auction that I am woefully behind on and have been reminded about a few times. I also have one commission on at the moment. An addition to a Sisters of Battle Army that I've already done about 3,000 points for the guy, and he wants a few of the newer models for it. And that's really fun because he chose... Okay, here's an example, right? The primary color on that armor is Oxford blue. I promise you that is not blue, it is purple. And it's also not Oxford blue either. But Vallejo Oxford blue is a very nice purple that he uses for his army, but an instance of the paint pot lying to you for sure.
Right.
So that's the immediate thing. In the longer term, I am really looking forward to getting back into cons. I want to get back into teaching more generally. Just I love sharing what I know and learning new things from others. So very, very much looking forward to that.
Nice. So I want to do something to you that we haven't done in a little bit. It's called the lightning round.
Okay.
And this is we're all off the cuff here, but basically I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I want to get as fast a reaction as you possibly can. Okay?
Sure, let's do it.
So we'll start out with a softball. When was the last time you drank your paint water?
It's been a couple years.
Been a couple of years. Have you changed what you put it in now?
Okay, so the reason is because I put it in a weird-ass cup with a spring mounted above it for holding my paintbrushes. And it's really hard to drink it when you get hit in the face by a spring.
That is great deterrence, for sure. Okay. So, non-metallic metals or true metallic metals?
Non-metallic metals. Once again, I'm lazy. I am not going to paint with metallic flakes using separate brushes that get wrecked really quickly. Separate paint pot of water, separate palette. No, I'll just paint with the paints I already have.
Nice. Okay. Gods of the brushes come down and say, you may only paint the rest of your painting career with one paintbrush. Which paintbrush?
Rosemary & Co. Series 33, size 4.
Size 4?
Yeah.
Nice. Have you tried the 8s or 22s?
I've tried the 8s. I find they don't keep their tip as well, or it may have just been the experience I had, but my current Rosemary & Co. size 4, which is my primary brush for painting, I've used for 3 years on like 1,500 models, and it still keeps a tip. It's still perfectly crisp and clean.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, see, I have some Raphaels that are 4 years old, and I told that to Eric Swinson, and he told me I didn't paint enough. That's why my brushes are still good. So
I think Eric and I are going to have some words. I mean, brush care is valuable. I only started that after I'd taken my class with Kat and Caleb a few years ago, and it's made a world of difference. Brushes have gone from lasting a few months to years. And, I say paint an hour a day. In reality, I will normally paint 4 to 5 hours a day. Right? And every single one of those 1,500 models was touched by that brush size 4 at one point or another.
Wow. Okay, that's impressive.
So if you take care of your brushes, if you don't overload them, if you clean them out routinely, use brush conditioner or the brush soap. I use Gentastics. And squeeze out a little bit of the moisture so the moisture's not sitting there. Store them with the tip down. You're going to be fine. And they're going to last you a long time. And spending $9 on a brush instead of $1 on a bunch of brushes, it suddenly becomes worth it.
Right. The last thing, and I have to, Eric is right, I don't paint enough, but that's besides the point, And so the last lightning round question, your choice, model paints, acrylic inks, or heavy body acrylics?
No, that's not a fair question. Yes.
Yes? No, you got to pick one of them.
Inks.
Inks.
Assuming I'm still allowed to Zenithal Prime inks.
Of course.
Yeah. I love the translucency. Again, I'm a lazy painter. A single coat of ink over a Zenithal Prime can get you 90% of the way to a gorgeous model.
And Caleb got me hooked on using the GW glazes through the airbrush.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame that...
I literally, when I found out that GW was ending that line, I went to my local GW store and literally bought all of the glazes that they had. And I got such a dirty look from the manager that I felt bad and left one pot of each behind.
One pot of each behind. Nice. Yeah, I bought a couple of them. I can't lie. Between the glazes and Lamy and Medium, those are my main GW products that I use. But so one of the things I love to ask artists is there a model out there that hasn't been made yet that you would like to see made, or if there's something out there that you want to paint? Like I always give the example of the Stephen King series Dark Tower. I want to see the characters of that come to life in miniature form? Is there something that you'd like to see?
Oh man, I can honestly say I'd never even thought of it. I will say, as a slight anecdote, whilst I'm quickly thinking of an answer, years ago when they started coming out, I bought the full line of Discworld miniatures from Micro Art Studios, which is a Polish manufacturer, knowing full well I wasn't good enough to paint them yet. And every so often in recent years, I've cracked one out and painted it. I think I painted 3 or 4 now.
Right.
And the rest of them still sit mint in blisters. And when I next get the hankering and feel like I'm at a level to do them justice, I will be doing those. More recently, the Harry Potter paints miniatures have kind of been the same for me. Right. I would love to see really, really nice quality sculpts from Fifth Element.
Oh.
I'm a really big fan of the movie. I'm a really big fan of Luc Besson's style and Jean-Paul Gaultier's costumery in that film.
Yeah.
And, not just the costumes and the individuals, but the vehicles. Everything in that is so immersive to that world.
Right.
And I've seen a few knockoff Lilus and Dallas, and that's fine. But I'd love to see the wider universe captured in that. And I don't know what end it would serve. I don't think there's a particularly good game you could make out of it. Maybe an RPG, licensed RPG, but just to see those models.
You don't need that anymore because we've got 3D printing, right? So you don't even need a game anymore. That's the justification, is to paint for paint's sake.
Well, so I'm a weirdo.
Yeah, go wait for a minute.
You will not be able to after that. So go cast your ballots, folks.
I think we're good.
I'm a weirdo in that regard, and it's one of the reasons I don't tend to paint busts and don't tend to paint larger figures. Is I love painting, I love the process, I want the end result to serve a purpose, and that's contrary to everything that you learn in the art world, right? It exists for its own sake. Yes, I appreciate that. I love looking at the work of others, but I only have so much shelf space in my house, so it's got to do double duty.
And so the last question I love to ask our artists is, the motto of the podcast is Better, Braver, Happier Painters. And could you give us some last parting advice as our listeners continue on their journeys?
Every time you finish a model, turn it upside down and paint the date on the underside of the model. Just month/year. All right? 2 reasons. 1, that is bonus freehand practice. But second, and way more importantly, that is going to give you the time frame of your journey through the hobby world. And 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, you're going to feel like you haven't improved any, and you can just crack out one of those old models and see how far you've come in 6 months, in a year, whatever it is. That's what I I advocate it at every opportunity. It's what I would say to any artist. If you're not doing it already, do it.
That's awesome. That's actually great advice I never really thought of. Thank you. So tell us, how can our listeners find you?
My main platform these days is my Instagram account at Raggy Paints. I also organize a kind of mentoring program that's completely free and voluntary. The Instagram account for that is at Hobby Mentor, but it's mostly done through Discord now, and the link is on that account. Other than that, you can find me on Facebook. I used to have a channel on YouTube. I'm currently looking at moving it over to Twitch. So, stay tuned on Twitch. That's what I would say. I have an old blog, www.ragados.com. I don't post all that often now, but if you're wanting longer in-depth tutorials or to see how I've done some of the stuff I've done in the past, kind of like David Soper, it's a little bit more in-depth, a little bit more wordy. So
he's one of my favorite artists. I love David Soper so much.
I was at Warhammer Fest the last time it was run in 2019, I guess now. And I mean, he just blew the competition away that year with the Dan called Trogoff.
Yes.
And I got to see that up close, and it is incredible. And the man is just so disciplined in everything that he does. He he's been in this so long that he has customized his figure case for taking to things so that his figures are bolted down. And I'm like,
Damn.
I don't know how nobody else has thought of this before, because to my knowledge, nobody has.
Right.
Because, man, you are a genius. Like, you could throw that across the room and everything in it would still be fine.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, the man is a legend.
But thank you so much for joining us, Dev. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I have had a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you. Dan and I would like to thank Dev Sodagar, a.k.a. Raggy Paints from CK Studios, for joining us today. You can follow him on Instagram and Facebook at Raggy Paints. Make sure you give him a follow. He is a fantastic artist, super nice guy, and I really enjoyed the time I got to spend with him at Reapercon, and I hope in the future our friendship continues. So thank you so much, Dev. Please check him out. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Listening to Paint Dry. Now, here's one of the things. One of the reasons why we did the the YouTube page is so that it's a lot easier for those who don't do podcasts to listen to our episodes and paint. They can just pull it up on YouTube and knock themselves out and have a good time listening and painting while they hear some of the best conversations we've had with artists around the world. You can also follow us on Twitter at Dry Listening. Please like, subscribe, or follow, which I believe is only follow now on Apple Podcasts. It's switched from like to follow. Anywhere you get your podcasts, we're at 150 platforms. You can send us an email at listeningtopaintdry@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Talk to us about what you're working on, ideas for the future shows, or let us know just how we're doing. We'll be back in a couple days with an interview with Anthony Rodriguez, a.k.a. Pirate Monkey, and then we'll have more interviews following usually every other day after that. So thank you so much again, and we really appreciate you listening to the podcast and sharing us with your friends, families, and other hobby maniacs out there. The journey to becoming a better, braver, happier painter starts with a single brushstroke. Until next time. Listening to Paint Dry with Mike and Dan is a production of LTPTWMD. All rights reserved. No portion of this recording may be used without the express written consent of the host. The music is Death by a Thousand Questions by Springtide. Download from the Free Music Archive on a non-commercial attribution share-alike basis. All views and opinions expressed in the show are solely the views and opinions of the person who said them. All celebrity voices, if any, were impersonated and done so poorly.